Hey Scott, how's it going?
I'm alive. How are you?
Yeah, I'm fine. Personally, I've been on demon time, just you know, trying to do everything at the same time. I've been getting a lot done of recent, which is great, and I feel like I'm hitting a certain kind of momentum at work and all of that. So.
You say demon or daemon? Like Lucifer or like Linux?
Oh, no, 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 no. Like Lucifer. Although
Okay.
that's not kind of what I meant. When someone says, oh, I'm on demon time, means that I'm just killing it right now or something, if that makes any
Never. That
sense.
must be a Legos slang.
For real.
Never heard it. I'm on demon time right now. Like
Yeah,
what? Do a seance or something? Like what?
yeah. Fair enough, fair enough. So how have you been?
Mm, I'm kicking it. So we did a couple of videos on certification preparation
Yep.
and transparency. I failed twice. Uh,
Mm,
and so it's just very humbling when you feel like you've covered as much material that you believe is adequate and you still don't succeed. So, anyways, I'm like, all right, let me do some hands on stuff. Let me try to man up and get out of my feelings and keep pushing, right?
yeah.
So, I was like, oh, how can I integrate this into my lifestyle? Beach Mobile, that's my passion project. Haven't actually wrote code in probably 8 to 12 months. Let me add a billable module to it. When I say billable, as in like imagine having a billable monthly subscription
Mm-hmm.
to anything,
Okay.
and with the features of letting customers pay you, view
Mm-hmm.
their payment history, and also, well, before they could do any of those, a prerequisite would be for them to register onto your platform so that they can have a subscription
Mm.
and then they can make their payments, etc. So I thought, yeah, I'm Scott Nimrod, aka Bismugger. I could knock this out in like maybe a business day, aka 8 hours. Nah, it took me. It took me probably. I mean, it took me about a business day and a half. But that business day, I don't like. I'm at home. I'm in between assignments, aka
Yeah.
contracts. So man, it took me about a week of like maybe doing 2 hours at a time. I don't know if that adds up to like 12 hours. What's 7 and 2, 14? Yeah, so it took me approximately a week or maybe six days. And you know what was interesting? I know I'm talking a lot, right? You know
Yeah,
what's
no, go
interesting
ahead.
is I keep forgetting that what I do is very, I think, unique because I don't see anybody else doing it and I don't see it in code bases where I write out my compilable specification. That's the very first thing I do, in
Okay.
which I'm literally writing the function types of operations and the data structures that are going to support those operations, hence business operations,
Mm-hmm.
registering for a subscription, submitting a payment request, viewing payment history, right? I write all that out in my operations.fs module and my language.fs module within my subscription library or project. And I'm thinking like, all right, I'm good. Now let me blow some life into it and start writing the interpreter. Hence, I just wrote the specification. Now I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
have another library that serves as an interpreter. In this case, it's my data gateway
Yep.
library. It interprets the specification with its own implementation details. And then I realize I forget every single time that whatever I conjured up initially of my specification, it looks nothing like the original. So, like for example, when when you decide to register and you decide that you want to get status on it, it took like, believe it or not, probably 4 to 5 data structures that I added called registration status
Mm.
from your original registration form. In fact, when you submit a registration form, what gets saved in Cosmos DB as well as Redis within Azure isn't a registration data structure. It's a registration status. And it's just things that you just start iterating on, and you have these realizations of what really makes sense and how it's going to be used. Yeah, I'm done.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, no, it's a. I don't think it's a bad thing that you start out that way and then you have to change it and then you realize, oh, I need this, I need that. I think there is this hubris that a lot of software engineers have, which is thinking that they know everything at the beginning or they can plan effectively for what the software should become, right? Or they already, sit down and architect a whole solution from start to finish, and that architecture as is going to fly all the way to the end. The truth is you don't know. And the more you explore a domain, the more you code in that domain, the more likely that you are going to have to deviate from your plan or your whatever specification you've put, whatever um okay, let me put it this way. Whatever details of the architecture itself will remain the same, but the specifics, the details can change, and it's okay to change. So I don't see that as a problem. In fact, I see the opposite as what really happens in the industry most times is architect comes up with an architecture during development. People discover that okay, maybe we need to change certain aspects of this thing, and because the architect is a senior person or something, they have to stick with whatever it is and have to start looking for workarounds around it, and things like that, or being resistant to change. I think is really a bad thing. So those are my 2 cents on it. um the way I see it is it's okay, right? It's fine if you have to change. If as you are building some system, you realize that whatever abstractions you originally used are insufficient, and that's fine.
Well, the first thing I think about is in the real world, when someone is paying you, they're
Mm,
going to say, "How long is this going to take you?" And you could say, like, I'm first name last name, hence speaking in third person. I'm Scott Nimrod. Knocked this out in like a day, right? But then it's like you realize, oh man, all these different cases and like all the integration details and like what really is going to be optimal for a client user. What really is a meaningful way to retrieve this data so that they can just take it and run with it,
mm,
minimizing the amount of requests that they need to send because all this information is in the payload without it
correct.
being hella like redundant or weird looking. And so it's kind of like it's still art.
That is
I
true.
wish there was a word that would merge engineering with art because that's exactly what I believe software development is you have your requirements, but then you also have to make sure that it's for humans. And humans are weird creatures. They like to have things a certain type of way, regardless
Hmm.
of if it works or not. Right? They have to consume it and want they have to not be stressed about leveraging what you have. And
Mm,
that I think is an art. It applies to vehicles, it applies to washing machines. Like, and that's exactly what I ran into. So,
yeah, yeah. Like I get what you said about it being an art form. Um, I agree with that. For the Why do I agree with it? Well, I agree with it because there are so many points where the engineer's discretion has to come in, right? And there are there are no right or wrong ways of doing certain things, right? Especially when it comes to the details, and it's at that point that it now becomes an art form because you have to make trade-offs. You have to discover, okay, what makes sense in this particular context versus what doesn't make sense, what looks aesthetically pleasing, right? there are still rules around it. So it's not pure art, like abstract art, where someone can just spit on a canvas and call it art. No, there are still rules around it, but there's a lot of interplay between it. It's kind of like chess. It reminds me a lot like chess, right? So chess is it's in the opening and in the end game is it's a science. In other words, there is the objective truth in those aspects of the game, but in the middle game is everything is subjective, right? Even computers get to certain positions and they're like 000. I don't know, like that's and these are engines. So I think from that's how I like to think about it. Software engineering is also it still has a lot of art form in it. Mm. Anyway, I think
Yeah.
we yeah. Go ahead.
And just what very briefly, what's interesting is like my last assignment, I kind of served as a software development engineer and test. So I was writing code.
Hmm.
Um, but this is my first time actually like voluntarily writing code at home for free for myself.
Mm.
And it just feels different
I, I
because
I I don't think that's true.
you
You've
don't think
been
it's true?
building Beach Mobile for almost 5 years now, and it's for yourself.
Yes, but I graduated to an architect role. And so a lot of organizations, they don't like it when I write code. They don't like it when I roll up my sleeves and I
Mm,
lead by example. Because the status quo, for whatever reason, maybe that could be a separate show, is they believe that for the amount of money that they're paying you, you should be making like executive decisions,
mm,
and not be in the trenches with the people that you're telling to do the work, which I completely disagree with. But maybe that's just my lack of experience. So, anyways, I say all this because obviously you have more freedom when you're writing code for yourself than you do for an employer. With an employer, you if you're mature, then you're taking into consideration the budget that they have.
yep.
You're trying to make sure that the code that you write isn't gold plate, but it's essential. You're trying to reduce the noise of the code so that what's on that editor is
Hmm.
absolutely necessary, and there's nothing else that distracts that will waste someone's time. Um, that's for an employer, but for yourself, you're free to experiment, try to figure out how clever you can be, just so you could appease your ego. And yeah, I write code. I write code completely different for an employer versus myself.
Mm, really?
For an employer, you got to get it done and make sure that it's repeatable, aka testable.
Okay. Yes, I see your point. I see what you mean. Like there's several orders of magnitude of freedom when you're writing for yourself because you know so yeah, the guardrails for which you are writing code is a lot more strict when you are writing for a company and you're being paid for it because someone else has to review the code, and the code is not your property. The code is the property of the company as well. So yeah, I totally see that. And speaking of which, maybe that we should just use that as a good segue to the second part of this video, which is to pretty much you sent a tweet. I'll put the link in the description if I can. Of what did the tweet say that to like review it or something like that?
Yeah. So the thought process is whenever I go into unfamiliar territory, aka when I do
Mhm.
something for the first time, my policy in life is usually to, at least when it comes to software development, is make sure it's good enough
Yeah.
before I write a blog post on it. And a blog post is really
Mm.
a technical, it's just a technical journal, so that inevitably when I run into the same problem domain or the same technologies that I have to use, I don't have to start from scratch trying to figure out how to do it. I could just go to like bizmonger.net or whatever my blog
Mhm.
domain is, URL is, and put in a search like, I know I did this using Redis or minimal API, and hopefully I could just, oh, it's right here, copy paste. Oh man, I wrote this like 5 years ago. Well, hopefully it's still good. Nothing gets deprecated. Copy
Mhm.
paste, make some tweaks, and that has worked out for me.
Mm. Nice.
So the motivation was, let me get some eyes on what I wrote so that they could call out some foolishness that I never considered. And then once I make some alterations to what I believe is good, then the next step is over the span of 3 days, put my thoughts on the editor and spit out a blog post. And my blog posts really aren't formal; they're just brain dumps. So I can
Mm.
literally just copy paste if I ever need to reference it again.
Okay. Okay, sounds good. So let me go ahead and share my screen. I have cloned the repo, and I will just give you my thoughts on it. I don't know if you see this.
Like WTF, WTF, WTF.
All
Like,
right, let's see.
why did Scott do it this way? One thing that I do remember from your last code review, which was maybe a year or two ago,
Mm-hmm.
is I was using a whole bunch of async blocks. And then at
Yeah.
the end, I would have like start as task or whatever I would pipe into. And you're like, well,
Mm-hmm.
dude, why don't you just use a task computation expression? I'm
Yeah.
like, I didn't know there was a task. So I literally remembered to do that like last minute and
Mm.
swapped all my async computation expressions for task. That helped out a lot. And that was because feedback from you, the last time I had you look at my code.
Yeah, yeah. So I will say though, like I've gone through this is the code. I've done some preliminary like looking through it, and I saw a lot of things that were interesting. In particular, so my first call out, it's not really a bad call out, it's actually a good thing. I love how you just used top level files in the project. Like it's one of those things that I remember, liking a lot about F sharp in the beginning. But now that I do F sharp most times, I hardly ever do this. I don't know why, but this is a lot more. I think it speaks to me coding in other languages like Java and JavaScript and C sharp and having folders and carrying over that baggage to F sharp. So I will say I like this the
Are you
way
talking
you.
about folders as in like controllers, services, repository, like that stuff? Or
Yes, that stuff, right?
I
So
just I just instead of using folders, I just use hella libraries.
I can tell, yeah. But the beauty of it is that you could just look at the code and just see, okay, this is what this library is about and all of that. So I would say that's a plus. That's great. Okay, so the first thing that jumped out to me is you wrote the web app, the server itself in C sharp. Like, why did you do that?
Because I had limited exposure to minimal API, and C sharp is still a first class citizen for documentation on MSDN.
Mm,
I don't know if it's still called MSDN, but in regards to documentation, there's still way more examples and tutorials and C sharp on how to do something with a technology than F sharp.
mm,
And the focus of this wasn't necessarily to practice F sharp as much as I enjoy F sharp. The focus was to get hands on uh, experience with doing Cosmos DB and Redis.
mm. Okay, that makes sense. So let's go straight to the first question in your tweet, right? So, your tweet, you said, I'm
What
practicing.
are you using Visual Studio Code or using Writer? What's your IDE?
This is Rider.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. So going back to your tweet, right? The first question was, I'm practicing Azure Redis and Cosmo DB using F sharp. For Redis, I need to develop a close connection strategy so that I don't open and close it for every read write request. Can you like go into a little bit of details as to what you mean? So first of all, this is the Redis.
Yeah. So if you go
Yeah.
to if you go to Cosmos DB,
Mm-hmm. Okay.
like for example, just go to like query or post for Cosmos.
All right. Let's go query. Yeah, this one. Yeah.
Go to the post one.
Okay. So, oh, I see what you mean. I see what you mean. So it's like, let's say I want to get the status, then now call payment history. container.get is going to create a connection and close it, and this is going to repeat the same thing, right?
Yes. So the post is more explicit. If you go
Mhm.
to cosmospost.fs,
Okay.
it's one above,
All right.
and then you scroll down.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, why is this rocket science?
So I think it's container.get. I think this is where it starts from here, right?
If you do a search, no, that's not it. If you do a search for open, surely you'll see it.
Open.
Well, there's a close the sync somewhere,
Okay.
but that's not a file. Oh, Writer lets you do that. That's cool. I don't think Visual Studio lets you do it at that level.
Oh, yeah. Right. That's pretty,
Yeah.
pretty
All right.
awesome.
So
All
when
right.
we get
Mm-hmm.
status,
Mm-hmm.
you'll see that the very first line, at number 15, line 15,
Yep.
we connect,
Mm-hmm.
and then at line 23,
Mm-hmm.
we close.
Correct.
And so for every post or query,
Mm-hmm.
I'm literally making a connection,
Yes.
which I'm sure is going to be have performance costs,
Mm-hmm.
and then I'm closing it once I perform whatever I need to do in regards to CRUD, hence create, read, update, delete.
Yep.
And so I know my experience from Azure Service Bus
Mm-hmm.
is don't do that. That 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 that's unnecessary, and that just slows things down,
Yes.
especially when it comes to computing. Instead, rely on a member variable for your connection,
Mm-hmm.
and just keep that live until you have a strategy for closing your connection. Maybe that strategy is keeping tally of the number of connected clients, whatever that strategy is. Um, I didn't feel like thinking about how to implement that, because I feel
Okay.
like that will probably take 4 hours of my life to do it right,
Mm.
based on whatever options are available. So I just put that in the Twitter post. Hey, don't attack me over my connection strategy for when I open and close it. Um, I didn't forget about it. Just check out other things for right now.
Okay. Okay. So one thing that jumps out to me, right? So just to crystallize the thought on what the issue is. The issue here is that, let's say in a single request, I check the status and maybe I get the payment history in a single request. What this will essentially do is it will create a connection to a database, execute, and then close that connection when it's done, and then repeat the same thing again, create another brand new connection again, and then close it again, right? Which makes it, what's the right word now? It makes it expensive, if that makes any sense, right?
Yep.
So what we want to do is we want to remove the responsibility of opening and closing the connection outside of this code. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes. So what we want is a situation where this status will take in a connection as a parameter, do what it needs to do, and that's it. It's done. Right. So,
That's one option. I would
mhm.
just. This will be an interesting debate.
Okay.
So, even though this library is called Data Gateway,
Hmm.
these line number 10 is get registration status. That's the function type,
Yes.
right?
Hmm.
If you drill down into that, you will see the policy for this domain, right?
Correct. Yep.
So hence billable subscription dot operations, and
Hmm.
request registration, get registration status, submit payment, get payment history.
Yes.
Now all of a sudden I'm having like Mark Seaman on my shoulder, because I'm sure that he has some blog posts and some NDC talks on what I'm
Hmm.
about to say, where because I'm practicing some piece of domain driven design
Mm-hmm.
when I'm trying to speak the language of a business.
Yep.
What I don't want to do is mix
Connection string here.
technology details into a business domain.
Correct.
So something that I would rather do
Mm-hmm.
instead of adding uh, technology implementation details
Yes.
that really aren't relevant for the business,
Okay.
I would just create a singleton called connection, and that would just be a one instance living thing. And who cares if that it's just one connection. It's just one instance for now.
Yeah.
You don't like that?
I so do not like that. And
Okay.
the reason I don't like it is that it has burnt me before, right? I have been burnt badly. Well, to be fair, it was during my early days anyway. And the reason why you get burnt by it is because um, typically connections are not thread safe, meaning that if multiple threads are trying to access the same piece of data, you're going to get corruption, meaning that some writes are going to override some reads, and all hell breaks loose. So that's why they tell you to not make your connections singletons. I think the only exception to that is HTTP context, and that has its own reasons why that's the exception to that. But in general, connections to databases, whether Cosmos, whatever, you don't want to make them static, which is what a singleton is, because they are not thread safe, and they're not thread safe because you can imagine that there are there are different reasons why each of them are not thread safe, but the main thing is that they have to manage state, and that managing of state becomes very, very tricky. Okay, so that's why they tell you not to do it. One thing I do like about so I'm going to show you how to solve this problem. There's a very simple solution. So let's go back to something like this now. With this registration, if you look at this method signature of registration, it's actually very straightforward. I give you a registration request, and I'm expecting a task of result of registration status with error description. That's it. There is no DB context. There is no Cosmos DB in it, and that's a good thing. Okay. Now, the problem now is that you are now in a position where you need those things to actually get the job done. But now, how do you, since it's not in the signature, how are you going to get it, right? Am I right?
Hmm.
So, so the solution to this is to use a partial application. In particular, I want you to pay attention to this here. Okay. So you see, at this point, we're taking that's what
All
V
right.
is, right?
So if you could pause,
Yep.
because I'm sure that most folks, one, they're looking at this file and
Hmm.
it's Egyptian hieroglyphics. They don't know what they're looking at.
Yeah.
Um, but more importantly, they don't know what partial application is.
Okay. So should I do like a quick primer?
Oh, you can do it however you want.
Okay. So let me just do a quick primer of what partial application is. I need Visual Studio Code. Give me 1 second. Um,
While you're preparing it, I could attempt to do it in 5 or 10 seconds.
okay.
So partial application
Mm-hmm.
is, imagine being able to call a function that isn't fully qualified with all the arguments that's required for it to execute.
Yep.
Instead, you defer the execution of that function that you're calling so that your client will take up the responsibility to figure out what the remaining arguments are in order for it to execute.
Okay.
That's a combination of currying, or if we're talking about F sharp, partial application, which
Mm.
I will fail a test to articulate the difference between currying and partial application, because they're very
So
like tightly coupled. One is just F sharp specific, and the other is currying is theoretical, like
not
grammar.
really. Not
Okay.
really. Currying is a facility built into the language that allows you to do partial application easily. Currying in and of itself isn't it's a language thing.
No, it's not. Okay, so
Okay.
this is where I think I can win this debate with you. Okay,
Okay. All right.
the concept of currying is the following:
Mm-hmm.
within functional programming,
Yeah.
meaning no dependency or reliance on side effects.
Mm-hmm.
In theory, a function only takes one argument.
Yes.
Meaning, if 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 you have a function called do the right thing and you
Mm-hmm.
pass in who directed do the right thing? Spike Lee. Okay.
Yep. Yep.
You can also pass in some of the actors such as Martin Lawrence and whoever else acted in that movie. Okay. So
Okay.
that's at least two arguments, aka parameters of that function do the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep.
Currying is saying, in theory, this function do the right thing can be converted into, even though this do the right thing takes two or more or has two or more parameters to it,
Mm-hmm.
in theory this function can be rewritten by the compiler to just take one parameter or argument, and we'll just rewrite the signature of this function so that it takes a function that
Okay.
has n number of parameters.
Mm-hmm.
I probably lost everybody because I almost lost myself. But does that
So
would you kind of agree with that or no?
yeah, I do agree with that. I
Okay.
think what we're arguing about is the specific semantics.
Okay.
So let's start with this. So let me just show you something. So this is the definition in Wikipedia. Of course, Wikipedia is not the source of all truth, but I think it's closer to what we're trying to get at. It says in mathematics and computer science, currying is the technique of translating a function that takes multiple arguments into a sequence of families of functions, each taking a single argument. So you're correct in the sense that um, you want, so currying is a way to say instead of taking multiple arguments at the same time, I can convert that idea of taking multiple arguments into taking a single argument that now returns a function that takes the next argument and so on and so forth. So that way I can keep my constraint of having only one function, only one argument per function. Does that make sense?
Hell,
So, so,
that's if I
so
had glasses on because that was
yeah,
a
so let me show what that looks like very quickly. So let's say we have a function called sum a and b, and the outcome is a plus b. Very simple function. So what Korean is saying is, as you can see in the signature is even giving you a hint. What this is saying is that it's simply saying let sum be equal to a function that takes a and returns another function that takes b that returns the final a plus b. So I can call this sum2. These two functions are equivalent. That is currying. Okay. Now, what partial application is to say rather than executing all the parameters at once, so currying makes partial application possible. If you didn't have currying, you can't use partial application. Does that make sense? Yeah. So what currying is saying is rather than doing, sum 2 plus 3 straight away, so I can say let result one be equal to sum 2 plus 3. I can instead allow you to say result 2. I can allow you to partially apply 2 and then do this. This will be result 2 and apply 3 now, right? So that's what you already know what that is. So looking at this simple example, right, the technique that we are going to apply here is to say we're going to first, we know we want for our business logic to work, right? We need both our connection string and some value, for example. So rather than putting that connection string in the method signature upfront, right, I can partially apply it with just the connection string and then get a function that matches the exact signature that I want. Okay. That's what currying is. Now, let me show you something. There's also something else I want to show you, because this particular problem you just highlighted is pretty much what we have here. This is a very popular tweet. I'll try and also add the link, but I want you to pay attention to how it's structured, right? So here at the top, you have your pure domain logic. You have your IO logic, the one that actually goes to the database, gets connection string, whatever. That is now going to call your pure business logic. And then you can now have your IO implementation here. So he gave an example. This is an example of a specific example. So notice how his business domain is still pure, doesn't have anything in it. And then at this point here, he has the opportunity of creating the connection and then partially applying that connection. So he takes the connection out and then partially applies it on getX. Where's getX? There we go. So that the actual logic itself remains pure. Does that make sense? So the lifetime of the object is controlled outside of the function that is using that object. Does that make sense?
At a high level.
Yeah. So if we do it that way, then we can control, okay, create the connection upfront and then have different, have all your business logic partially apply that connection. Okay, you know what? I need to give a specific example because this is sounding ridiculous now. So let's take something simple, right? Let's start with this Cosmos post. Let me refactor this a little bit. So what we want to get rid of, is it get rid of this time? Where was that? Where were you? Okay, let's start with the Redis one. The Redis one is a good example. So what we want to do here is we don't want this get registration status to have the Redis. So instead, what we're going to do is here, this is the point where we need this cache, right? Okay. So this is the stuff we want to have just one of, right? That we don't want to repeat multiple times.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Well, it's really just that single line.
This one, line 15, right?
No, you're right. We only have one database that we're referencing. Yes, both lines.
Yeah. Okay. So here's what we're going to do is we're going to pass in, since we are only using, okay, we still need to close connection. Let's not worry about connection for now. Okay. Yeah. Let's not worry about connection for now. Let's just focus on the cache itself.
Oh, you don't have to close the connection. That was the whole point of, like, remember, it's expensive to open close. So
Yes.
hence the connection strategy. Do we keep a tally of connected clients, or is there another way that we want to manage when we want to close a connection? I can't say the word optimally.
Optimally. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. But I'm thinking from the perspective of your database. What you want as your database is just this cache itself. As far as this logic is concerned, it really just wants to call get with the key and the tenant ID and the plan to get a response, right?
Mm-hmm.
So here's what I'm going to do is I am going to partially apply this guy. Okay. And how I would do that is to come here and say cache I database. And now I can get rid of all of this. Okay. Don't worry, to make sense in a moment. I can get rid of this as well. I can get rid of this. Okay. All right. Now notice how get registration status is still pure, right? We didn't have to change this signature. Okay. But we now have like this cache passed in. So now let's see. The places where this method is called will start to break. So places like here, for example, because now we're supposed to pass in the cache before passing in the request itself. So what we're going to do here is we are going to now I think now the problem has moved up one step, one layer, right? What does this do? Okay. So this it still goes back to what I was saying, because we have to call registration first, then we'll call status here. So here's what I'm going to do. Okay. I'm going to also pass this as well. Don't worry, I will refactor it later. But let's say cache I database as well. This method here would be, your naming is funny. What do I call this now? I'll call this, what's it trying to do? Get registration, right? Like this. Okay. Get registration. Don't worry, it will make sense in a moment what I'm trying to do. Okay. So this function is fine now. I should probably repeat the same thing here as well. This goes away. This goes away. Oops. Yes, this goes away. This goes away. This goes away. And I just put the cache here. I database. Okay. All right. What else? Okay, now that I've done that,
My OCD is tingling.
just hear me out first, because I'm trying to, I will refactor it later. So here we pass our cache as well. Yep. So you can see now that we're reusing the same cache. Okay. So I think all this looks good, blah, blah, blah. Let me build. I need it to fail. Okay. It's not compilable registration. Let's pass cache here as well. Ooh. You see that? Okay, these are your tests anyway, so it doesn't really matter that much. Let's see.
Yes, I'm one of the minority developers that actually write tests.
You say what?
I'm one of the minority developers that actually writes tests. I will always throw a jab about automated tests
Yeah.
and the mainstream practice of not doing it.
How do I get, okay, now that I have the connection string instance, how do I get the cache? Now you see something interesting. You are forced to do this because your code your code depends on the connection to the database. So you are forced to even mock that as well, right? Anyway, for now,
Well,
let's just,
the client is forced to pass in the connection string value, which I thought is a standard.
yeah. Do you have MOQ in your test, or what do you use?
I use hand rolled test API. There's a test API. If you go to, if it's at the top of your solution explorer, the
Okay.
first node under tests, but I don't use containers. I literally just hand wrap my dependencies.
Yeah, this is rough. Just give me one sec. Give me one sec. Let me quickly do this.
That's another debate.
Fair enough. But I'm trying to yep, there we go. Okay, if we have our test API, I should be able to, let's build again. Yeah, I was trying to mock. Okay, good. I have our mock cache. So this will be mock cache.object. There we go. Any more errors? Saying could not copy to output directory, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, so those aren't unit tests; those are integration tests.
Oh, okay.
I'm not sure if your mock is
Oh,
going
yeah,
to.
that does make sense. Oh, no wonder. Okay. You know what? Never mind. Let me not overthink it. I just want to show what that looks like from, this is really what I want to build, and the build is succeeding. Now, here's the interesting aspect of it. I think if I build the server, it shouldn't build because the signatures have changed. Oh, it built. Okay. Let's see. We have registration. Redis post registration takes iCache database. Where is this called post? It's called in the C sharp, right? Post dot registration.
You're talking about the actual like operation that talks to IO, like
Yes.
Cosmos DB.
No, no, no,
It's in
no.
your data gateway project.
Okay. So what I'm saying is, okay, let's follow, let's go with the flow, right? So when you call registration here, that comes here, and at this point,
Where is it hitting the database?
we made some changes. I wanted to know, like for example, status now.
Okay.
Didn't we just make a change to this guy, Cosmos query? Oh, it was with Redis. Okay, never mind. Never mind. Where did you make the Redis call?
The Redis is called within your Cosmos code
Okay.
because we don't explicitly the client doesn't have a clue what Redis is. The client just
Mm-hmm.
wants to hit a data store. The
Yeah.
implementation details are that whenever we get ready to hit the data store, we first check to see if we have it cached in Redis. And if we
Mm-hmm.
don't, then we hit the Cosmos database. And then once we get our value from the Cosmos database, then we
Mm-hmm.
update our cache, aka Redis.
Ah, okay. So that means the
It's the
logic should
cache
be,
aside pattern.
yeah. So that means the logic should be here, right?
The logic is in your query because it's only relevant. Go one file below. It's only relevant when you're querying.
Oh, okay.
Give me. Oh, go to sync query. Three, 4 files down.
Oh, sync query. Okay, yeah, 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 yeah. This is
Yeah,
what I'm
so that's
looking
it.
for. Yeah. Yeah, this is what I'm looking for. Okay. This makes sense. So the question I'm asking is because I've changed the signature of this guy now, right, to depend on the Redis database. Where is he used from? Okay, he's no, it's like that. Is that the only place where it's used? Where is sync query used from? Find all usages.
Sync query. The client to sync query is our tests.
Wait a minute. But wasn't the server supposed to call sync query?
The client. Yeah, yeah. So if you go to, I think it's called program at the bottom of your Solution Explorer,
Yep, this one.
and so if you hover over Git, in theory, it should reference sync query. Does it,
It
or does it call Cosmos?
it doesn't. It just calls Cosmos directly.
Yeah, yeah. So that's a mistake on my part.
Oh, okay. Okay. Anyway, um, the point I was getting at is that because this is passed in, you can then have this guy control whoever the caller is the one responsible for controlling the lifetime. So from program.cs, when you call, right, the first thing you would do would be to open up your Cosmos query, create your I database, pass it in, like partially apply it, and then
Y-
um,
yes. Can we verify that in order for querying to occur,
mhm.
the the arguments that you defer have to be at the end of your function signature. And the way that my function signature looks now, I've never done
Mhm.
it the way that you currently have it, where it still says it implements a function type. Um, it still implements a function type, but
Mhm.
you also put in a custom parameter before it. So, like if you go to any of those files that you just modified,
Oh, I see what you mean. I see what you mean.
yeah. So, like you see that the fun v and then the arrow, like
Mm-hmm.
the this cache would have to, and maybe it does when the compiler is done with it, but
Yeah.
that cache argument or parameter in
Mm-hmm.
theory needs to be the last argument that your get registration status relies on, that it implements. You understand what I'm trying to say?
I understand what you're trying to say,
Okay.
but let me show you. Okay, so this is get status.
So
This is
so
red.
if just
Mhm.
hover over status, the status function, see what the signature looks like. Or
Yeah.
actually, you could see it in the, what do you call that, code lens or
Yes,
whatever,
code
right?
lens. Yes. So it takes database, then
Yeah.
returns
So
a function that
it has to be swapped,
it
which
has to
isn't
be
really.
swapped.
iDatabase needs to be the last parameter in order for currying to be performed.
Mm-hmm.
The question is, do we need to make alterations to the fun v arrow task? Is there
No.
anything that we could do there? Because right now, status returns that function,
Yes.
right? And
Mm-hmm.
so maybe there's an opportunity for us to make alterations to the fun v arrow task so that
Mm-hmm.
that status function can actually return the parameters in the correct way. Hence, cache being the last parameter
No, you don't. So the cache shouldn't be the last parameter.
for currying.
Yes, but it's not. This is important. Not for currying, for partial application to work, right? Because what is going on here is that we have a value, which is the function status. It takes cache first, then takes the registration, right? And then returns the outcome. So, but by they call it it's partial application. Sorry, it's not partial.
So,
It's
so we're partially applying the registration data, and the
yes.
client is being explicit about the cache.
So I remember now. Okay, I remember now. I remember now. So this isn't really called partial application. It's partial application, but it's not the way you
Active
think it
patterns.
is.
Well, active patterns is
It's
something completely different. Never
no, no.
mind.
Active patterns. Is different. What we're doing here is something called pre-computation. So I can give you an example. So this is an example of a pre-computed value, right? So let's say it's useful for things like memoizing, for example. Let's say I have a function that let's call this load data or something, right? And in this function, the first thing I do is say I initialize a dictionary, right? Right. Let's say this is maybe int to string, whatever, right? Yes, let's say int to string, and then maybe I should just give this a value. Let me give this a value, right? When I do this, now if I say return, if I say, return a function x such that return is not there, return a function x such that, you know, oh, I remember it's something like this. You know what? Never mind. I don't want to complicate this because I see where my mind is going, but it's going to be too complex. All I'm saying is there's this concept of pre-computation, and what that means is that when a function is queried as part of the querying hierarchy, you can have any function, you can have any logic that you don't want to be invoked multiple times. It will just be invoked once, and then the functions that come out of it can now be invoked multiple times. That's the concept here. So let's say I have let's say I have read file, for example, okay? Or let's say read record. That's the name of the function. This read record could take a connection string, right? As the first parameter. And what I could do is I could then open the connection here in this first part. So I'll say open the connection string. And only then do I have another function that now uses that connection string. Okay. Connection dot, whatever to string. Now, the ramification of this is that I can say read, let's call this read database, right? Let's do it this way. I can then have a read record method that first calls read database with the connection string, and then I can simply call read record multiple times. So I can say while whatever, right? Read record, I'm passing whatever parameters I want over and over and over again. So when you think about it, this is going to execute once, creating the connection, and then this guy can keep reading multiple times. In fact, the way it will look like would be something like this. You would say something like use connection and do this, knowing fully well that never mind. Uh,
So use is to dispose of the iDisposable instance as soon as the function ends.
Terminate.
Yeah,
Yeah.
terminates.
Yeah, this would be bad because the closure captured the connection, even though the connection would be terminated. Anyway, long story short is the point I am getting at is that doing it this way, right? Having passing the connection string and then having a function that closes over that value, a closure, if you will. What that allows you do is it allows you to it allows it's another way of doing dependency injection in functional languages. You see what I
Okay.
mean?
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. So to put that into perspective with this guy, if you look here, by passing this cache, right, it means that the caller can call this can the caller can take this bigger function, partially apply it, and get a more special specific function without that special specific function having to take those parameters explicitly.
Okay.
Yeah. So I need to do an example. You know what? Let me go with whatever this guy is calling. So get status, for example. Let's pick this guy now. Let's say container.get. What does container.get do? Okay, it creates a database connection. What does it return? It returns a container. Okay.
Mm.
So yeah, okay. Let's use this one as an example. All right. Let's pick this guy. So here we have our get status, and ultimately it needs to get a container. So what we do here is to say container is to pass in the container explicitly, get rid of this guy, and everything remains the same. Let's do the same for this as well. Container, and let's get rid of this guy too. Okay. Now, of course, the C# becomes upset. But what this means is that if you look at get status, you will see that get status, it takes a container, a registration receipt, and then it returns an F# func. Is it an F# func or F# result? This is not good. Let's see. Container registration receipt, task of result. It's getting converted to oof. Anyway, I think we should stop here, right? The point I was
Well, was there anything else in the code review? Because
yeah,
it
no,
looks like the
that
main part was the partial application, but it looks like we got lost in the weeds.
yes, I did get lost in the weeds, but yes, just the partial application part, um, passing in the dependencies rather than having the functions themselves, create and instantiate those dependencies, especially because the lifetime of those dependencies are not dependent on the function, so they should be passed in as parameters. I think that's the solution there.
Okay.
Yeah. But other than that, I really, like how you organized your files. The implementation was clean. The only thing that I found weird was that you used C sharp to talk to the F sharp, which you explained. But other than that, I think everything else was good, was cool.
Cool. I think
Yeah.
tomorrow I'll start messing around with Azure API management.
Mm.
Have you ever have you ever dealt with API management in Azure or AWS?
No, no, I haven't.
Yeah.
Like API gateways, right?
Basically, provide a facade over your API or APIs in which you can
Oh,
manipulate. You can make alterations to the input payload, or alterations to the response, or you could throttle, you can cache depending
you
which
could
tier you select.
aggregate things like that to
Yeah,
so that you have one API endpoint, but you can now say, oh, slash posts should go to this post microservice and things like. Yes, I've used.
basically you could create an abstraction over
Yes,
your API.
yes, I've used that in AWS. I have experience with AWS um, for that particular API gateway feature. So,
Yeah, so that's what I wanted to get some hands-on like coding experience working with that product in Azure.
oh,
That's the
okay,
next step for this billable subscription repo.
okay.
Uh,
Okay, looks good. Like I said, the only change that I think you should make would be to probably have a separate module that the C sharp will call. And in that module, that's where you do your partial application, right? You currently kind of have that. That's what the whole get module is doing for you, right? So any endpoint in the C sharp code is calling a single method on that module. You get what I mean?
mm-hmm.
So it's at that point in that module, that's where you should now apply your partial application. That's where you would create your connection, then use the partial application to call the Redis or the Cosmos and things like that. And then that function too is responsible for closing it when all the work is done.
I understand what you're saying.
Mm.
The all the work. So you have multiple clients that could hit up the same API or web
Yeah.
server instance, right?
Hmm.
And so I still think I should probably keep track of the number of clients that are that are relying on this API within a given time window,
Okay.
and then maybe have a fire off an event based on the last request. Yeah, so there's a couple strategies. One is fire off an event based on whatever threshold that I put in for the maximum time without a request.
Oh, hold on. Hold on. ASP.NET already has this functionality. You want to apply rate limiting, right?
I don't care about that right now, but I mean, I can
Okay.
practice it. What I was referring to is a policy for when to close the connection. And so I was saying
Oh,
that
okay.
maybe
Okay.
if there's if this web server sits idle for more than, I don't know, 3 minutes,
I
then
see what you're saying,
close the
but
connection.
don't do that either.
Just
Don't
leave
do
it
that
open.
either. No, because what it means is you're saying that in between requests, the connection will be shared. Is that correct?
Yes.
No, don't do that. That's what I'm saying will put you in trouble. Sharing connections across requests because each request is coming in at its own thread, and those threads don't share anything in common. In fact, anything they share becomes a source of
So that's
corruption.
different from service bus, because in service bus the documentation specifically says like have a member, leave it open, just leave it open,
Hmm.
right? So it has protection against. threads and your system dot http.net doesn't, or whatever the namespace is that
Yeah.
exposes the HTTP client.
Yeah, so the way it's done today with ASP.NET Core is you're supposed to inject a HTTP connection factory, and that HTTP connection factory is responsible for pulling connections and giving you HTTP clients, right? And the reason for that was kind of related to what I was saying earlier about like HTTP clients is the only exception to the rule that um, you shouldn't share connections or clients, if you will, between threads. And the reason for that has to do with socket exhaustion, which is a real thing. But that all that aside, if you're going to have like DB context for entity framework, or you are connecting to SQL of any form, or you're connecting to, and I'm sure that applies to Cosmos DB and so on and so forth, you don't want to share that connection between multiple threads. In other words, don't have a static variable that that all connections are going through, right? The reason for that is that it's not thread safe. Most of them are not thread safe, and they are going to overwrite each other, and that will be bad. So instead, the guidance is for the lifetime of a request. So how they do it in C Sharp, for example, is in the DI container, they will register it as in request scope, right? They will say in request scope or scoped to a request. So when a request comes, during the context of a request, when you request that object, the connection is created once, and then as long as all the other services that need that object within the lifetime of a request will get the same instance.
How about this? Uh, would it be possible for me to get the unique client? Like,
Mhm.
I don't know if that means the IP address, but whatever says that it came from this specific client.
Mhm.
Um, then I maintain a dictionary of connections.
You could do that, but my point is, so going back to what I said earlier, you could do that. That's fine. But my point is, you don't have to, because that whole mechanism is already built into ASP.NET.
Yeah, but the factory that you referred to, like, I'm not
Mhm.
interested in the HTTP factory. I'm interested in the or
Cosmos.
in the Redis. I think it was the Redis factor. It was one of them,
Yeah.
Cosmos or Redis. That's the
Yeah.
part that, like, you were advocating. Keep isolated to what I thought you were saying is individual clients, and not share it between clients,
You know what?
because
Can I quickly show you a piece of code that I wrote?
sure.
I think that will help you. That will help explain what I'm talking about. So let me share my screen. We may have to cut all that part out, the part of, me getting lost in the weeds.
Hmm.
But here's what I mean. Okay, give me one sec. Let me know if you see my screen.
Hmm.
So this is a personal project I have. So here, this is the program.fs. This is where the web server is, we start the web server, create our host builder, have some this thing. But pay attention to this part. Do you see this configure services?
Yeah.
Right. So it's at this point here that, oops, this is C sharp stuff. So let me go to the configure services method. Good. There we go. So it's at this point here that I configure the different connection things and services, if you will, right? And for each of these, so let's say, let me pick, give me a sec. I want to pick something. Let's pick this guy. Excellent. This is still a lot of stuff. Okay, you know what? Let me pick this block Bitcoin API. This will help explain what I mean. So let's take this guy for example, right? So this is the web host, but as part of configuring the web host, you can configure a bunch of services. That's here, configure services. And in particular, let's pick these Bitcoin services. Okay. Now, for these Bitcoin services, I now have the option of adding scoped. This is what I was trying to get at. You can add scoped dependencies to say inode repository should be scoped to each request. Okay. So that means that every time I ask for this inode repository, I am always going to get the same instance within the context of a request. And where this becomes important is that, okay, I take that scope. Yeah, this is where it's created. Where this becomes important is in the handler itself, in the logic of the request. So let's pick this guy, for example. The first thing I do is to ask the context for that service. And when I get it, I can then pass it in to any of the business logic that I have, right? And the lifetime of this object is controlled by this guy. Does that make sense?
Not yet,
It's
because I
still,
was I
it's
was
still
looking
vague.
at how you were doing your
Mhm.
function signatures, in which I didn't know it could be done that way.
Oh, this, yeah, yeah. So if you think about it, HTTP handler is a function signature that is already well defined. So if you look at it, you see
Yeah.
it's
So where do the next and the what's CTX connection?
yep,
Where
yep.
does next and connection go in the order of the parameters? Does it go at the end or
So take a look at this guy. All right.
like okay? Like if you hover over get block, what's the signature?
The
Actually,
signature,
I'm looking at it. I keep my eyes won't let me focus on it.
yeah.
Yeah, so you don't have next or connection
Nope.
in the signature of the function.
Hmm.
Okay, yeah.
So let's roll back a little bit. HTTP func is a, should I say, aggregated method signature that takes the HTTP handler, takes a HTTP func, HTTP context, and returns HTTP func result. HTTP func result. Let me, you know what? Let me just. Why can't this? Why doesn't this allow me go to definition? This is so weird.
Oh, okay. So string goes in the whatever you have in
Mhm.
the explicitly in the parameter
Yep.
outside of the contract that you're implementing goes in the front.
It goes in the front, exactly.
Okay.
And the reason it goes in the front is because at the point where I am executing this, let's say get block, for example, there is a partial application going here. This would be difficult to explain if you don't understand giraffe, but the
I
point
wrote
is that
Nikeza in Giraffe 5 years ago.
you say what?
I wrote Nikeza in Giraffe 5 years ago.
Oh yeah, I forgot. That's true. Okay, so but if you look here, right, route CIF, right, this print formatter is going to pass as the first parameter the string. So get block takes a string, and that's what gets passed, and it needs to return a HTTP handler back, which is all this next, CTX, and so on and so forth. So looking at this function signature here, for example, this HTTP handler is exactly this.
Yep.
Okay. Whereas address is passed in as an extra parameter.
Okay.
Yeah. So by doing it this way, I can easily come here and just ask for the instance that I want and know that I'm going to get the same correct instance per request because I've added it to the service container, registered it that way, and all of that. Make
Okay.
sense? Yeah. Yeah, so that's it. That's just what I wanted to show. So this pattern, I use it pretty much everywhere. My core, let me see, let me show what that looks like. My method signature for my business logic can now be simple because, let me see. Oh, okay. Yeah, here. Thank you. This can now be simple because all that infrastructure has been abstracted away out of the function.
Mm.
You get, so for example, I want to get a block by ID, right? So maybe what I can do is I can make you start a YouTube video where I explain this code base. But let's say I want to get the hash of a Bitcoin block or something like that. All I just need is the height, and it will return this. This is the specifics of it, but the actual implementation. So if I go here, if I come here, the actual implementation is a lot more complicated. So this is the caching that you are trying to do. So here I have a caching mechanism already built in. So the caching is transparent to the caller. The caller who is calling the function doesn't even know that there's caching involved. And how I do that is, let me see. Yep. How I do that is I have the actual logic here, and then I pass it into a cache function, something like this. So this is the operation I want to cache. So I have the configuration of the cache, the key, and then this is the value that I'm passing to this function. So what I do here is I check the cache to see if it exists. If it does exist, then if it doesn't exist, that's only when I actually go ahead and execute it. But if it does exist, I just deserialize it and return it transparently, right? If it does exist, if it doesn't exist, only then do I execute this operation. Do I apply the operation with the value in question? And I get a result, and I serialize it, and I store it in the cache, and I return it. So this is like a memoizing function. It's a pattern. It's a functional pattern.
So is this
So with
system
that,
up and running?
yeah, yeah, yeah. Let me see if I can find it. Give me one sec. Let me show you. This is the platform. It allows you to check Bitcoin transactions, to it allows you see it's still loading. Yeah, it allows you see Bitcoin transactions per block. This is live data, and in each block you can see the details of the block when the block was created, January 21st. That aligns with this, and then all the transactions in that block. So this is the Coinbase. This is what the miners got from mining that particular block.
You
And
wrote
these are the transactions. You
you
can
wrote
see that
the website, or you just did the back end?
everything, the website included.
Yeah, I'm anti web. I could do mobile and I could do desktop, but when it comes to like just web pages, like
Yeah, like
I have a mental block.
hell no.
Well, just it doesn't come natural to me. Like I so prefer XAML. XAML feels natural to me.
Really.
Remember, I took a certification in WPF, so
Mm.
like I brute force it to be like back then native to me.
One question I will ask you though is, have you used the model view update?
I know what
Do
you're
you,
talking about. Are you talking
yeah.
about Fabulous within F sharp?
Yeah, Elmish, the Elmish
Yeah,
pattern.
I did, Amish. I forgot about that. Yeah, Nikeza was written using that.
Oh yeah, 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 true. That is the same thing I
It's a
used.
public repo if you
Yeah,
want to
yeah.
look at it.
It's the same thing I used as well for this platform. I used the
But
Elmish.
it got nasty. Um, I think I brought it up to you before. Where
Yes,
like my message type
was
declarations,
was now
it was
massive.
1,300 lines of code
Yeah, that
because you
was
had to
that.
upfront declare every single message within your application that you would
Mhm.
handle,
So let me show you. Let me show you how I put this together. And I know this is really, really long, and we'll have to cut out
which was
several parts of this. But
probably the biggest reason why I didn't mess with Elm anymore. Is Elm still like getting traction, or is it kind of like I
yeah, the Elmish team, I think the Elm team, they did something. I think they changed like some compatibility stuff. So a lot of people were pissed off about it, if last I recall. Let me show you what that looks like, the code itself. So this is the client code. So this is the app class that you talked about. If you notice, it's very simple. Then it has a view function. If you notice, the view function isn't like thousands of lines and so on and so forth. But what it does is it delegates its job to other, should I say, sub applications. So this is a main application. You have the main app function, view function, and init and update function. So if you head over to state, right, this is the global init and the global update, right? It doesn't sprawl on forever. And the reason it doesn't sprawl on forever is because it just delegates that task. So for example, when I have any update where anywhere in the site, I know which page I'm going to. So if it's the Bitcoin page, that routes to the Bitcoin update function. The Bitcoin update function is in this Bitcoin page, which it has its own, yeah, good. This one is all put together in one place, but it has its own update, its own update function, its own init function, its own, and so on and so forth. Same thing with Ethereum, and same thing with the homepage as well. Does that make sense? So the problem you are facing in Elm with Elmish was that you wanted to fit everything into one application, if you will. An application is a combination of the init function, the update function, and your view function, right? So what you should have done is to break that single logical entity into smaller applications and then have them all like delegate. So the view function for the
I didn't
main
know
app
how to, and no one at Stack Overflow at the time
new.
advised me on how to do that. I didn't think it was possible at the time.
Oh, so let me show you how I learned it. Just give me a sec. This is important. So this is the real deal. Okay. So this is this diagram here you see, right? You have your program, you have your main application, your main method, your main view is rendering the whole application. But that can now delegate the rendering of a portion of that main view to a sub application and things like that. So, for example, where
Was
I
that a
learned this
feature
was,
that was added, or has it always been like that?
it has always been like that. At least in Elmish, I don't know about Elm because so this platform, Edelweiss Data, right? We built it with that design in mind, right?
Mm-mm.
And let me see if I can show you what that looks like. We built everything we built the entire thing with Elmish, and it's a very complicated application, I assure you. But we were able to. So, for example, if I go to manage, yep, I can do this. No, no, no. I just want to see the data itself. I don't want to manage it. Contacts. I go to view. There we go. So you can see that this is not a simple app by any stretch of the imagination. It has like metadata, it has JSON parsing, it has what do they call it? Aggregations and things like that. And we built this entire thing using Elmish by this idea of decomposing the main app into sub apps. So your main view function renders is responsible for coordinating the entire view, but it delegates most of the work of the low level, okay, render this table or render this thing to sub applications. And that's how that complexity is managed, you
Mm.
know. Yeah. So this was a very long video. Hopefully people were able to learn something from it, I think.
Well, one thing I learned was that you can implement a function type and add on a parameter. The parameter that you add on is going to show up at the front
Yeah.
or of your parameter within your function signature. So I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Um, and then I think what you said about partial application.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, yeah, I think that makes sense. I think that I think I'm gonna leave the connection implementation as is, just because I mean no one's going to hit up the server anyway, and
True.
I would think that probably up until like under 100 different clients, it shouldn't be an issue.
Fair enough.
It's just if I were trying to make money off of it and actually like market it as a product and get paid off of it,
Mm.
I would have to revisit it. So
All right, man. Fair enough. So it was a great discussion.
yeah, next week, knock on wood, we're supposed to have an Azure security expert slash author. So I look forward to that.
Yeah, that would be awesome too. I'm looking forward to that as well.
Uh, so
Yeah.
that's it. I don't have anything else. You're making a face.
All right. Yeah, I don't have anything else as well. So if you guys enjoyed this conversation, please give us a like, give us a subscribe. We really appreciate it. And yeah, see
Learn
you
F
next
sharp.
time. Bye.
See.